The battle for Severodonetsk in Ukraine's eastern Donbas area has become the focus of Russia's offensive in recent weeks. Russia-backed separatists accused Ukrainian forces of sabotaging an evacuation of civilians from the city's besieged Azot chemical plant, where about 500 civilians and an unknown number of Ukrainian fighters are believed to be sheltering from missile attacks. It wasn't possible to verify that claim. Russian officials had announced a humanitarian corridor from the Azot plant a day earlier, but said they would take civilians to areas controlled by Russian, and not Ukrainian forces. The Ukrainian governor of Luhansk, Siverskyi Donets, told the Associated Press that heavy fighting in Severodonetsk continues today as well. The Luhansk and Donetsk regions make up the Donbas. The situation in the city is getting worse because Russian forces have more manpower and weapons. But Ukraine is holding back. In the Lviv region near the border with NATO member Poland, Russian forces used high-precision caliber missiles to destroy the depot near the town of Zolochiv. Russian Defense Ministry spokesman Igor Konashenkov said shells for M777 howitzers, a type supplied by the United States, were stored there. He said 4 howitzers were destroyed and that Russian airstrikes also destroyed Ukrainian aviation equipment at a military aerodrome in the southern Mykolaiv region. Ukrainian officials did not immediately comment on the Zolochiv strike, while focusing most of their attacks on eastern Ukraine, where they are trying to capture large swaths of territory. Russian forces have also been hitting more specific targets elsewhere, using high-precision missiles to disrupt the international supply of weapons and destroy military infrastructure. Civilian infrastructure has been bombarded as well, even though Russian officials have claimed they're only targeting military facilities. In the northeastern Sumy region, the governor said 2 helicopters flying in from nearby Russian territory fired 5 missiles around the city of Lviv. A residential building was hit, killing 1 person and wounding 6, and another infrastructure was damaged. Loud explosions were heard in the city of Sumy while air raid sirens were going off, and the mayor urged residents to remain in bomb shelters and not to publicize any information about what was hit. NATO members are pledging to send more and longer-range weapons to Ukraine. President Joe Biden said the US will send an additional $1 billion in military aid, the largest single tranche of weapons and equipment since the war began. The aid will include anti-ship missile launchers, howitzers and Morans for the high-mobility artillery rocket systems, all key weapons systems that Ukrainian leaders have urgently requested. Germany is providing Ukraine with 3 multiple launch rocket systems of the kind that Kyiv has said it urgently needs to defend itself against Russia's invasion. Defense Minister Christine Lambrecht said that Germany will transfer 3 M270 medium-range artillery rocket systems along with ammunition. Germany said the transfer, which echoes similar moves by Britain and the United States, will be accompanied by training and will have a swift and significant battlefield impact. In recent days, Ukrainian officials have spoken of the heavy human cost of the war, with Kyiv's forces outgunned and outnumbered in the east. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky thanked Biden for the new aid package. Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu said it may be possible to create secure corridors to transport Ukrainian grain through the Black Sea without the need to clear sea mines near Ukrainian ports. Cavusoglu's comments came a week after he discussed with his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov a UN plan to open up Odessa and Ukraine's other Black Sea ports to allow millions of tons of grains to be shipped to the world markets. Russia has demanded that Ukraine remove mines from the Black Sea before grain exports can resume by ship. Ukraine rejects the proposal, insisting it would leave its ports vulnerable to Russian attacks. Cavusoglu told reporters that since the location of the mines is known, it would be possible to establish secure corridors. Turkey, Russia and Ukraine have appointed military officers and set up a telephone hotline to try to overcome hurdles over crop exports. UN spokesperson STA copyright famed Ujarik welcomed Cavusoglu's comments as extremely positive but declined to discuss the plan. A UN delegation investigating war crimes in Ukraine has visited areas of the country that were held by Russian troops and found evidence that could support war crimes allegations. The delegation, chaired by Erik Mos, a Norwegian judge, visited sites including the Kyiv suburbs of Bucha and Irpin, where Ukrainian authorities have accused Russia of mass killings of civilians. At this stage, we are not in a position to make any factual findings or pronounce ourselves on issues of the legal determination of events, Sidilase said. However, subject to further confirmation, the information received and the visited sites of destruction may support claims that serious violations of international human rights law and international humanitarian law, perhaps reaching war crimes and crimes against humanity, have been committed in the areas, he said. With Ukrainian and international organizations investigating war crimes cases, Mos expressed concern at the risk of investigations overlapping or causing witnesses more trauma by probing the same events repeatedly. The US Navy warship USS Gravely docked in the Baltic port city of Gdynia, Poland in what officials described as a show of support for Ukraine. Before the invasion, its population was 44 million, but 7 million Ukrainians have now fled the country as refugees, and a further 7 million are internally displaced, according to the United Nations. Russia's economy, meanwhile, is expected to contract by 8.9%, the World Bank forecasts. Its economy has been hit by myriad international sanctions and a mass exodus of foreign companies, but high prices of oil and gas, of which Russia is a major exporter, are keeping its current account balance in a healthy surplus and its currency relatively strong. Russian forces now control 97% of Ukraine's Luhansk region, Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu said, according to the Associated Press. The assessment comes after weeks of brutal fighting and heavy Russian artillery bombardment of much of the eastern Donbas, of which Luhansk is a part. Moscow says that full control over the Donbas is an unconditional priority. Much of the fiercest fighting, including street battles, is currently taking place in Luhansk in the cities of Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, where Russian forces have won major ground despite some recent successful efforts by Ukrainian troops to claw back territory. Some officials and pundits in other countries have suggested Ukraine should give up the Donbas to Russia in exchange for peace, an idea Ukraine fiercely rejects. Kyiv and many of its Western allies warn that if they give up land to Russia, Moscow will only be incentivized to expand its gains and try to capture more Ukrainian territory. Russia has been ambiguous on whether it would seek to capture more land. The United Nations has confirmed 4,253 civilian deaths and 5,141 injuries in Ukraine since Russia invaded its ex-Soviet neighbor on February 24. The Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights said the death toll in Ukraine is likely higher because the armed conflict can delay fatality reports. The international organization said most of the civilian casualties recorded were caused by the use of explosive weapons with a wide impact area, including shelling from heavy artillery and multiple launch rocket systems, as well as missiles and airstrikes. Russia's war in Ukraine has slammed global food exports, particularly grains and cooking oils, a huge proportion of which are exported by the two warring countries, because Russian forces are blocking Ukraine's vital Black Sea ports. The disruption in agricultural supplies has hit Middle Eastern and African economies particularly hard, as these regions rely heavily on Black Sea food exports and their largely lower income populations are now struggling under acute food price inflation. With inflation now running at multi-decade highs in many countries and supply expected to grow slowly, there is a risk that inflation will remain higher for longer, World Bank President David Malpass wrote. Speaking to UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson's cabinet, British Foreign Minister Liz Truss said new sanctions against Russia for its invasion of Ukraine are in the pipeline. The UK has already levied several rounds of sanctions on Moscow targeting individual oligarchs and contacts of Russian President Vladimir Putin, trade with Russia, banks and state media outlets. It also aims to phase out its purchasing of Russian oil by the end of 2022. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky decried what he called Ukraine's dead cities, once centers of life now almost entirely destroyed by Russian bombardment. He was referring to Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, crucial remaining holdouts in the country's east that Russian forces have almost entirely captured and that are key in Moscow's aims to take the entirety of Ukraine's Donbas region. Fierce fighting continues in both cities, with most civilian areas and infrastructure completely demolished. Ukrainian forces have managed to retake some parts of the embattled city of Severodonetsk in the eastern Donbas, where Russia has captured significant territory in recent weeks.